The courtroom felt like a freezer, but the sweat on my palms told a different story. I sat at the wooden table, my hands folded so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Across from me, Brandon looked like he'd already won the lottery. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his hair slicked back the way he always wore it when he wanted to impress someone important. Next to him sat Crystal, his secretary, who had somehow become much more than that. She wore a dress that cost more than most people's rent, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders like she was posing for a magazine. Behind them, Margaret sat in the front row like a queen watching her subjects. Brandon's mother had that same cold smile she'd worn at our wedding 12 years ago, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She'd never liked me, not from the very first day Brandon brought me home. Today, that smile looked different though. It looked like victory. Judge Wong shuffled through papers at her desk, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She was known for being fair but tough, the kind of judge who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. I'd heard lawyers talk about her in hushed tones, saying she could see through lies like they were made of glass. My lawyer, Mr. Peterson, sat beside me looking defeated. He'd warned me this morning that things didn't look good. Brandon's team had painted me as a lazy wife who contributed nothing to the marriage. They said I was just a gold digger who married Brandon for his money and his family's real estate business. The worst part was, some of it sounded believable when they said it out loud in that cold courtroom. Mrs. Martinez. Judge Wong's voice cut through my thoughts. Do you have anything else to present to the court? I reached into my purse with shaking fingers and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with tape, and my name was written across the front in my own handwriting. I'd prepared this envelope 3 days ago, but looking at it now, I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I have some additional evidence. Brandon leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer, but I caught the smirk on his face. He thought this was funny. He thought I was pathetic, scrambling for anything that might save me from losing everything I'd worked for. As I walked toward the judge's bench, my legs felt like they might give out. The envelope seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in my hands. Behind me, I could hear Crystal's high-pitched giggle, the same sound she made when Brandon told her jokes at the office. The same laugh I'd heard through our bedroom wall when I came home early from a client meeting 6 months ago. Judge Wong took the envelope from my trembling hands and looked at it carefully. What is this, Mrs. Martinez? Evidence, Your Honor? Evidence that changes everything? Brandon's lawyer stood up quickly. Objection, Your Honor. We haven't had time to review whatever Mrs. Martinez is trying to present. Overruled, Judge Wong said firmly. I'll review this and determine if it's admissible. I walked back to my seat, feeling every eye in the courtroom following me. Brandon was whispering urgently to Crystal now, but she just shrugged like whatever I'd given the judge couldn't possibly matter. Margaret leaned forward in her seat, her cold eyes fixed on me like a hawk watching a mouse. Judge Wong opened the envelope carefully, pulling out several sheets of paper and what looked like a small recording device. Her eyebrows raised slightly as she began reading. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall behind her. Brandon couldn't sit still anymore. He kept shifting in his chair, running his hands through his perfect hair. What could she possibly have? He muttered to Crystal, loud enough for me to hear. Crystal giggled again, that awful sound that made my skin crawl. Probably just more of her pathetic attempts to make herself look important. She whispered back, "Don't worry, baby. After today, we'll have everything. The house, the cars, the business. She'll be left with nothing." Margaret's smile grew wider. "As it should be," she said quietly. "That woman never deserved my son or anything that comes with being a Martinez." But something was changing in Judge Wong's expression. Her eyebrows had drawn together, and she was reading more carefully now. She picked up the recording device and held it close to her ear, pressing a button. I couldn't hear what was playing, but I watched her face change from curious to surprised to something that looked almost like anger. Brandon noticed it too. His confident smirk started to fade as he watched the judge's reaction. "What's taking so long?" he whispered to his lawyer. Judge Wong set down the papers and looked directly at Brandon. Then she did something I never expected. She started to laugh. Not a polite courtroom chuckle, but a real, genuine laugh that echoed off the walls. Brandon blinked rapidly, his face going pale. "What's funny, Your Honor?" The judge looked at him for a long moment, then at Crystal, then at Margaret sitting in the front row. Her smile wasn't kind anymore. It was the smile of someone who just solved a puzzle that had been bothering them for hours. "Karma, son," she said simply, setting the envelope down on her desk. "That's what's funny." Brandon's mouth fell open. Crystal stopped giggling. Margaret's victorious smile disappeared completely, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. The confident, powerful people who had been so sure of their victory just moments ago suddenly looked very small and very worried. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Whatever happened next, I knew that envelope had just changed everything. 6 months earlier, my life looked like something from a magazine. I woke up every morning in our beautiful 2-story house on Maple Street, sunlight streaming through the white curtains I'd picked out myself. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and vanilla candles, and Brandon would kiss my forehead before heading off to work at his family's real estate office. "Have a great day, beautiful," he'd say, straightening his tie in the hallway mirror. "Don't work too hard on those designs." I'd smile and wave from the kitchen window as he backed his black BMW out of our driveway. Our neighbors probably thought we were the perfect couple. The successful businessman and his talented wife, living the American dream in suburbia. My interior design business was finally taking off after years of hard work. I'd started small, doing friends' living rooms and small office spaces, but word had spread quickly. Last month, I'd landed my biggest client yet, redesigning the lobby of the downtown Marriott Hotel. The project would pay enough to finally renovate our own master bathroom, something I'd been dreaming about for 2 years. I spent most mornings in my home office, sketching designs and calling suppliers. The room used to be Brandon's study, but he'd given it to me when my business started growing. "You need the space more than I do," he'd said, helping me move my drafting table and fabric samples. "I'm so proud of what you're building." Those words meant everything to me. For years, I'd felt like I was just Brandon's wife, living in the shadow of the Martinez family name. His father had built the real estate business from nothing, and Brandon had inherited not just the company, but also the respect that came with it. People knew the Martinez name in our town. When I introduced myself as Elena Martinez, doors opened that had been closed to Elena Vasquez, the girl from the wrong side of town who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through design school. Margaret made sure I never forgot where I came from. Brandon's mother had a way of making comments that sounded sweet, but cut deep. "Oh, Elena, that's such an interesting choice for the living room," she'd say when she visited, looking at my carefully chosen decorations like they were garage sale finds. I suppose not everyone has the same refined taste. I tried so hard to win her approval. I cooked her favorite meals when she came for Sunday dinner. I remembered her birthday and bought thoughtful gifts. I even let her redecorate our guest room in her preferred style, even though the heavy floral wallpaper made me feel sick every time I walked past it. "She just needs time to warm up to you," Brandon would say when I complained about his mother's coldness. "She's protective of me. It's nothing personal." But it felt personal when she'd call during dinner, and Brandon would spend an hour on the phone with her, leaving his food to get cold while I sat alone at our dining table. It felt personal when she'd show up unannounced and criticize everything from my housekeeping to my cooking to the way I'd arranged the furniture. Still, I convinced myself that we were happy. Brandon brought me flowers every Friday, always roses, always red, always from the same florist downtown. We went to dinner at nice restaurants where he'd hold my hand across the table and tell me about his day. He'd talk about the houses he was selling, the clients he was impressing, the deals he was closing. "The Hendersons finally signed on that colonial on Oak Street," he'd say, cutting into his steak. 300,000. Not bad for a Tuesday. I'd listen and nod and ask the right questions, even though real estate bored me to tears. But seeing Brandon excited about his work made me happy. He'd inherited his father's gift for sales, the ability to make people trust him completely. Clients loved him. Other agents respected him. Even the bank president called him by his first name. The first crack in our perfect life appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. Brandon had been working late more often, coming home after 9 o'clock with stories about difficult clients and complicated deals. I'd started eating dinner alone most nights, saving his plate in the oven and reheating it when he finally walked through the door. That Tuesday, he'd forgotten his phone on the kitchen counter when he rushed out for an emergency showing. I was loading the dishwasher when it buzzed with a text message. The screen lit up, and I could see the preview without even trying to look. "Can't wait for tonight, baby. Wear the red dress I bought you." My hands froze on the plate I was holding. The message was from someone named Crystal, with a little heart emoji next to her name. I stared at the phone like it might explode, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Brandon had never bought me a red dress. In 12 years of marriage, he'd never once picked out clothes for me. He always said he didn't have an eye for fashion, that I was much better at that sort of thing. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Crystal. "Margaret says the plan is working perfectly. She won't suspect anything." My legs gave out, and I sank into one of our kitchen chairs. Margaret? Brandon's mother was involved in whatever this was. The woman who barely tolerated me was planning something with someone named Crystal, someone who was clearly more than just a friend to my husband. I sat there staring at that phone until I heard Brandon's car in the driveway. I barely slept that night. Brandon came home at 11:30, full of apologies about the difficult client who'd needed extra hand-holding. He kissed my cheek and headed straight for the shower, humming some song I didn't recognize. I pretended to be asleep when he slipped into bed beside me, but my mind was racing with questions I was afraid to ask. The next morning, I called in sick to my biggest client meeting. I couldn't focus on fabric samples and paint colors when my entire world felt like it was crumbling. Instead, I drove across town to a small office building where my childhood friend Carlos had his private investigation business. Carlos Rivera and I had grown up on the same street, back when my family lived in the tiny apartment above my grandmother's bakery. He'd become a police detective after high school, but started his own PI firm 5 years ago when he got tired of department politics. If anyone could help me figure out what was really going on, it was Carlos. "Elena!" He looked surprised when I walked into his office. "What brings you here? Please tell me this isn't about a cheating spouse." The tears I'd been holding back since yesterday finally spilled over. I think it might be. Carlos poured me coffee in a chipped mug and listened while I told him about the text messages. He didn't interrupt or try to make me feel better with empty words. He just took notes in his careful handwriting and asked the right questions. "How long has he been working late?" Carlos asked. "About 6 months. Maybe longer. I thought he was just busy with the spring market." And his mother mentioned in the text, "That's unusual?" I laughed bitterly. Margaret hates me. She's never included me in anything. The idea that she's planning something with with whoever Crystal is. It makes me sick. Carlos leaned back in his chair. "I'll need a few days to look into this properly. Can you handle acting normal at home until then?" Acting normal felt impossible, but I nodded. What should I do if he gets more messages? Don't touch his phone again. If he's smart, he'll be more careful now anyway. Just try to pay attention to his patterns. When he leaves, when he comes back, any changes in his routine. The next 3 days were torture. I watched Brandon like a hawk, looking for signs of guilt or deception. But he seemed completely normal. He brought me flowers on Friday, just like always. He asked about my work and listened to my answers. He even suggested we plan a weekend trip to the mountains, something we hadn't done in months. "You seem stressed lately," he said over dinner Friday night. "Maybe we both need a break." I almost believed him, almost convinced myself that those text messages had been some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. But then Carlos called. "We need to meet," he said. "Not at my office, somewhere private." We met at a coffee shop on the other side of town, far from anywhere Brandon might go. Carlos slid a manila folder across the table to me, his expression grim. "I'm sorry, Elena. It's worse than we thought." The folder contained photographs that made my stomach turn. Brandon and a young blonde woman entering a hotel together. The same woman leaving Brandon's office building at odd hours. Close-up shots of them kissing in his car in a parking garage downtown. "Her name is Crystal Hayes," Carlos said quietly. "She's 26, works as a secretary at your husband's real estate office. She's been there for 8 months. 8 months! The affair had been going on for 8 months, and I'd been completely clueless. There's more," Carlos continued. "I did some digging into her background. She's got a record: fraud, identity theft, some other financial crimes. Nothing major, but enough to show a pattern. I stared at the photos, trying to process what I was seeing. The woman was beautiful in an obvious way, with perfect makeup and expensive clothes. She looked nothing like me. "What about Margaret?" I asked. Carlos's expression darkened. "That's the really bad news. I followed your mother-in-law yesterday. She met with Crystal at a restaurant downtown. They talked for over an hour." He pulled out another photo. Margaret and Crystal sitting across from each other at a corner table, their heads close together like old friends sharing secrets. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I got this. Carlos handed me a small recording device. I managed to plant this under their table when they went to the bathroom. My hands shook as I pressed play. Margaret's voice came through clearly, cold and calculating as always. "The timing has to be perfect," she was saying. "We need her to look unstable, unreliable. Brandon's already started documenting her mood swings and erratic behavior." Crystal's younger voice responded, "What if she fights the divorce?" "She won't have a choice. By the time we're done, she'll be lucky to get anything at all. The house, the business, everything will stay in the family where it belongs. And after?" Margaret's laugh was like ice. "After, you'll be the new Mrs. Martinez. My son deserves someone who understands what it means to be part of this family." I stopped the recording, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the device. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to destroy me completely, to take everything I'd worked for and leave me with nothing. "Elena," Carlos said gently, "there's something else. I think they're planning to move soon. I overheard Crystal on the phone talking about court dates." Court dates? They were already planning the divorce, probably had lawyers lined up and papers ready to file. While I'd been worrying about fabric samples and hotel lobbies, they'd been plotting to ruin my life. The recording device felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my purse as I drove home that evening. I sat in my car outside our house for 20 minutes, watching the warm light spilling from our kitchen windows, trying to gather the courage to walk inside and pretend everything was normal. Brandon's BMW was already in the driveway, which meant he was home early for once. I found him in the kitchen, stirring something that smelled like his mother's famous beef stew. He looked up when I walked in, giving me that charming smile that had made me fall in love with him 12 years ago. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "I thought I'd surprise you with dinner for once. Mom gave me her recipe." Of course she did. Even when she wasn't physically here, Margaret found ways to insert herself into our marriage. I forced a smile and kissed his cheek, tasting the lie on my lips. "That's sweet of you. I'm just going to change clothes." Upstairs in our bedroom, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at the family photos on my dresser. Our wedding day, vacations we'd taken, Christmas mornings when we'd still believed we might have children someday. In every picture, I looked happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Had it all been fake? Had Brandon been planning this betrayal even then? My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Can you get into Margaret's house? I need to see what else she might be hiding." Margaret lived in the big colonial house where Brandon had grown up, about 15 minutes away from us. She'd kept it exactly the same since her husband died 5 years ago, like a shrine to the Martinez family legacy. I had a key because I sometimes picked up mail when she traveled to visit her sister in Florida. The next morning, I waited until Brandon left for work, then drove to Margaret's house. My hands shook as I unlocked her front door, feeling like a criminal even though I had every right to be there. The house smelled like lavender and old furniture polish, the same smell that had intimidated me for 12 years. I started in her home office, a small room off the living room where she kept all her important papers. The desk was locked, but I remembered seeing her hide the key under a ceramic angel on the bookshelf. Inside the drawers, I found folders labeled with dates going back 2 years. My heart stopped when I saw my name on one of the folders. Inside were photographs of me that I'd never seen before. Pictures of me leaving the grocery store looking tired and disheveled. Photos of me crying in my car after a particularly brutal Sunday dinner at Margaret's house. Images of me arguing with Brandon in our driveway after he'd forgotten our anniversary dinner. But worse than the photos were the notes, page after page of Margaret's careful handwriting, documenting every mistake I'd ever made, every moment of weakness, every time I'd been less than perfect. Elena forgot to send thank you cards for Christmas gifts. shows lack of proper upbringing. Elena served store-bought dessert at dinner party, lazy and inconsiderate to guests. Elena raised her voice during argument with Brandon, unstable and possibly violent tendencies. Elena has been working late frequently, neglecting her duties as a wife. There were dozens of entries, going back almost to the beginning of my marriage. Margaret had been watching me, judging me, building a case against me for years. Every stumble, every bad day, every human moment had been carefully recorded and twisted into evidence of my unworthiness. At the bottom of the folder was a letter addressed to a law firm downtown. I recognized the name Hartwell and Associates, one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in the city. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. "Dear Mr. Hartwell," it began. "As we discussed, I am prepared to testify regarding my daughter-in-law's unstable behavior and unsuitability as a wife to my son. The enclosed documentation should provide ample evidence for your case. I trust this will help ensure that the Martinez family assets remain protected." I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. In another drawer, I found financial documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing money being moved from accounts I didn't even know existed. Property deeds with my name, mysteriously absent from titles I thought I was on. Investment portfolios that had been quietly transferred into Brandon's name only. They hadn't just been planning to divorce me. They'd been systematically removing me from our financial life, making sure I'd have no claim to anything we'd built together. The house I'd helped pay for, the business I'd supported through lean years, the savings account I'd contributed to every month, all of it was being stolen from me, piece by piece. The worst discovery was in the bottom drawer, a thick folder labeled Crystal Hayes, background check. Inside were copies of her criminal records, employment history, and even medical records. Margaret knew exactly who this woman was, knew about her past crimes and questionable character, and she was still planning to welcome her into the family. There was also a timeline, written in Margaret's precise handwriting, outlining their entire plan. The affair had been orchestrated from the beginning. Crystal had been hired specifically to seduce Brandon. Margaret had been coaching her on how to act, what to say, how to gradually replace me in Brandon's affections. The final page was a list titled Post-Divorce Plans. It included selling our house, moving Crystal into the family home, and having Brandon adopt Crystal's daughter from a previous relationship. They weren't just planning to destroy my marriage, they were planning to erase me completely and build a new family in my place. I sat in Margaret's chair, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and felt something inside me break. But it wasn't my heart this time. It was my fear. They thought they were so clever, so careful in their planning. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I drove straight from Margaret's house to Carlos's office, my phone full of photographs and my mind spinning with rage. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to be smart about how to use it. These people had been planning my destruction for years. I couldn't just react emotionally and hope for the best. Carlos whistled low when I showed him the photos of Margaret's files. "This is incredible, Elena. She's basically built an entire case file against you." "What I don't understand is why," I said, slumping into the chair across from his desk. "I've spent 12 years trying to make that woman like me. I've bent over backwards to be the perfect daughter-in-law." "That might be exactly the problem," Carlos said thoughtfully. "Some people see kindness as weakness. Margaret strikes me as someone who respects power, not people-pleasing." He was right. Margaret had always been cold to me, but she lit up around Brandon's business associates and their wives, women who had money and status in their own right, women who didn't need the Martinez name to matter. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. Carlos leaned back in his chair. "Now we build our own case, but we have to be careful. If they suspect you know what's going on, they might accelerate their timeline." Over the next 2 weeks, Carlos and I worked like detectives solving the crime of the century. He followed Brandon and Crystal, documenting their affair with timestamps and locations. I played the perfect wife at home, cooking dinner and asking about Brandon's day while secretly recording our conversations on my phone. The hardest part was acting normal around Margaret. She came for Sunday dinner as usual, sitting at my dining table and eating my food while knowing she was planning to destroy me. I smiled and served her favorite dessert, all while thinking about those horrible files in her desk drawer. "You seem tired lately, Elena," she said during one of these dinners, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Are you taking care of yourself?" "Just busy with work," I replied, refilling her coffee cup. "The hotel project is keeping me up late." Margaret exchanged a look with Brandon. "Perhaps you should consider slowing down. All that stress can't be good for a marriage." I wanted to throw the coffee pot at her smug face. Instead, I just nodded and excused myself to get dessert from the kitchen, where I gripped the counter and counted to 10. Carlos had been busy too. He'd discovered that Crystal's criminal background was worse than we'd initially thought. She'd been involved in an identity theft ring in another state, using stolen social security numbers to open credit cards and bank accounts. The charges had been reduced to misdemeanors as part of a plea deal, but the pattern was clear. "She's done this before," Carlos explained, showing me printouts from court records. "Found wealthy men, seduced them, then cleaned out their accounts. Brandon isn't her first target." "Does he know about her past?" "Based on what I've seen, I don't think so. Margaret knows. She's got all this information in her files, but I think she's keeping it from Brandon. She's using Crystal as much as Crystal is using him." That gave me an idea. If Brandon didn't know about Crystal's criminal history, maybe I could use that information somehow. But I needed to be strategic about it. Carlos also discovered something else that made my blood boil. Brandon had been slowly draining our joint savings account, moving money into accounts that only had his name on them. Small amounts at first, then larger chunks as he got bolder. Over the past 6 months, he'd moved almost $50,000, money I'd earned from my design business. "This is theft," I said, staring at the bank records Carlos had obtained. "He's literally stealing from me." "Technically, since it's a joint account, it's legal," Carlos said. "But morally? Yeah, it's theft, and it shows premeditation. This wasn't a sudden decision to have an affair. This was a calculated plan to leave you with nothing." The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Carlos had been monitoring Brandon's email and discovered he'd been corresponding with a divorce attorney for 3 months. The emails laid out their entire strategy. Paint me as an unstable, gold-digging wife who'd contributed nothing to the marriage, then use Margaret's documentation to support their claims in court. One email made me physically sick. My client is concerned about his wife's increasingly erratic behavior. She's been working late frequently, neglecting household duties, and showing signs of emotional instability. His mother has been documenting these incidents and is prepared to testify if necessary. They were going to use my hard work against me. My late nights building my business, my dedication to my clients, my exhaustion from trying to be perfect for everyone, they were twisting it all into evidence that I was a bad wife. But the most damaging email was the most recent one. "We're ready to file." My client's mother has agreed to provide housing for him and his new partner after the divorce. The wife should be served papers next week. Next week. They were planning to blindside me with divorce papers next week, probably while I was at work or meeting with clients. They wanted to catch me off guard, make me look foolish and unprepared. I sat in Carlos's office, staring at all the evidence we'd gathered, and felt a strange calm settle over me. For weeks I'd been hurt and angry and scared, but now I just felt determined. "Carlos," I said quietly, "I need you to help me prepare something special for court." He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of special?" I smiled for the first time in weeks, the kind that's going to teach them what karma really means. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a nervous-looking young man who apologized 3 times before handing me the envelope. I signed for them with steady hands, even managed to smile and offer him a glass of water for his trouble. He looked relieved that I wasn't screaming or crying like he'd probably expected. I waited until his car disappeared down our street before opening the papers. Reading them felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. Brandon was asking for everything: the house, his business, our savings, even my car. According to the documents, I was an unemployed spouse who had contributed minimally to the marital assets. Unemployed? I'd built a successful design business from nothing, but somehow that didn't count because I worked from home and didn't have a fancy office building with my name on it. My phone rang within minutes. It was Brandon, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Elena, honey, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I wanted to tell you in person, but my lawyer said it was better to handle things officially. Your lawyer, I repeated, keeping my voice carefully neutral. How long have you been planning this, Brandon? It's not like that. We've grown apart, you know? We want different things. I think we'll both be happier if we make a clean break. A clean break? Like 12 years of marriage was just a business deal gone wrong. I see. And Crystal? Is she part of this clean break? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its fake warmth. I don't know what you think you know, but Crystal is just a friend. This divorce is about us, Elena, about how we've failed as a couple. How we've failed. Not how he'd betrayed me or how his mother had been sabotaging our marriage for years. How we'd failed. I'll need some time to process this, I said, and to find a lawyer. Of course, take all the time you need. I'll be staying at my mother's house until we can work out the details. Of course he would. Margaret was probably already preparing the guest room, maybe even letting Crystal pick out new curtains. After I hung up, I called Carlos. It's time, I said simply. You sure you're ready for this? I've never been more ready for anything in my life. That evening, I put on my best performance yet. I called Brandon, crying and begging him to reconsider. I told him I'd do anything to save our marriage, that I'd change, that I'd be a better wife. I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. I'm sorry, Elena, but my mind is made up. Maybe if you'd tried harder before, things could have been different. Perfect. Let him think I was broken and desperate. The next day, I drove to Margaret's house for what I told her would be a final goodbye. She answered the door wearing a black dress, like she was already in mourning for my marriage. Elena, dear, she said, not inviting me inside. I heard about the divorce papers. I'm so sorry things didn't work out. I was hoping we could talk, I said, letting my voice shake slightly. Maybe you could help me understand what went wrong. Margaret's eyes lit up with cruel satisfaction. She'd been waiting years for this moment, the chance to finally tell me exactly what she thought of me. Come in, she said, stepping aside. I suppose we should clear the air. We sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by family photos that had never included me, not really. Even in the pictures where I appeared, I looked like an outsider who'd wandered into someone else's family portrait. The truth is, Elena, you were never right for Brandon, Margaret began, settling into her favorite chair like a queen holding court. You didn't understand what it meant to be part of this family. You were always so common. I nodded sadly, encouraging her to continue. The small recording device in my purse was capturing every word. Brandon needs someone who can match his ambition, someone who understands business and society, someone like Crystal. Crystal? I asked, as if I'd never heard the name before. Margaret smiled. She's a lovely girl, so sophisticated, so understanding of what Brandon needs. They make a much better match. Have you met her? Oh yes, many times. She's been helping Brandon through this difficult period. Such a supportive young woman. For the next hour, Margaret laid out their entire plan, thinking she was just twisting the knife in my wounded heart. She told me how Crystal was perfect for Brandon, how they'd been planning this transition for months, how I'd be much happier once I accepted that I didn't belong in their world. You'll find someone more suitable to your background, she said with false kindness. Someone who doesn't expect so much. When I finally left Margaret's house, I had everything I needed. Her confession, her admission of the conspiracy, her complete lack of remorse for destroying my life. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and prepared the envelope that would change everything. Inside went copies of all the evidence Carlos and I had gathered, the photos, the financial records, the emails, the recordings. But most importantly, I included a letter I'd written to Judge Wong, explaining exactly what had been done to me and asking for justice. I sealed the envelope carefully, wrote my name across the front, and set it aside for court. Brandon came home late that night, probably from Crystal's apartment. He found me in the kitchen, apparently crying over a cup of tea. Elena, he said softly, I know this is hard, but it's for the best. I looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. I know, I whispered. I just never thought it would end like this. He actually looked guilty for a moment. Maybe we can still be friends after everything is settled. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Friends. After he'd stolen my money, planned my humiliation, and replaced me with a criminal. I'll see you in court, I said quietly. Yeah, he replied, already heading upstairs. See you in court. He had no idea how true those words would be. The morning of our court date, I woke up before dawn and stood in front of my bedroom mirror for a long time. I chose a simple navy blue dress. Professional but not flashy, the kind of outfit that said I was serious and trustworthy. I braided my hair back neatly and put on the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my wedding day. If this was going to be my last day as Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to look like someone worth fighting for. Carlos picked me up at 8 o'clock. You ready for this? He asked as we drove toward the courthouse. I've been ready for months, I said, clutching the manila envelope in my lap. They have no idea what's coming. The courthouse was exactly as cold and intimidating as I remembered from our first hearing. Brandon sat at his table looking confident and relaxed, like he was about to close an easy real estate deal. His expensive lawyer shuffled through papers with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Crystal sat in the front row behind him, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She kept touching Brandon's shoulder and whispering in his ear, playing the role of the supportive new girlfriend perfectly. Margaret sat beside Crystal, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap like she was attending a church service. She caught my eye across the courtroom and gave me a small, cold smile that said everything I needed to know about how she expected this day to end. Judge Wong entered the courtroom and called us to order. Brandon's lawyer presented their case first, painting me as an unstable, unemployed woman who deserved nothing. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Martinez, do you have anything else to present to the court? I handed Judge Wong the envelope and watched her face change as she read through the evidence. When she picked up the recording device and listened to Margaret's voice admitting to their conspiracy, her expression shifted from curious to shocked to something that looked like controlled anger. Then she laughed, that real, genuine laugh that made Brandon ask what was funny. Karma, son, Judge Wong said. That's what's funny. She set the envelope down and looked directly at Brandon. Mr. Martinez, based on the evidence presented here today, I'm not only denying your petition for assets, I'm also ordering an immediate investigation into your financial practices. Brandon's face went white. Your Honor, I don't understand. The evidence shows systematic theft from joint accounts, conspiracy to defraud, and perjury in your initial filings. Judge Wong continued. Mrs. Martinez, you are awarded the family home, all marital assets, and full ownership of your business. Mr. Martinez, you are ordered to return all funds illegally transferred from joint accounts, plus penalties. Crystal jumped up from her seat. This isn't fair. She's lying. Miss Hayes. Judge Wong's voice cut through the courtroom like ice. I suggest you remain quiet. The evidence also shows your involvement in this conspiracy, and given your criminal background, I'm recommending the district attorney review this case for possible charges. Crystal's face crumpled as she realized her past had been exposed. Margaret grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but the damage was done. Furthermore, Judge Wong continued, Mrs. Margaret Martinez, your documented harassment and conspiracy against your daughter-in-law constitutes elder abuse of process. You're hereby ordered to have no contact with Mrs. Elena Martinez and to pay damages for emotional distress. Margaret's mouth fell open. For the first time in 12 years, she was completely speechless. Brandon found his voice. Your Honor, surely there's been some mistake. The only mistake, Mr. Martinez, was thinking you could destroy an innocent woman and get away with it. Judge Wong's gaze was steel. This court finds your behavior reprehensible. You've lost everything you tried to steal, and you'll face criminal charges for fraud and theft. As the judge's words sank in, I watched my husband's world collapse around him. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by a scared man who finally understood the consequences of his actions. Crystal was crying now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. Brandon, you said this would work. You said she was stupid. Shut up, Brandon hissed, but it was too late. Even his own lawyer was backing away from him. Margaret stood up shakily. This is ridiculous. That woman has poisoned you against my family. Mrs. Martinez. Judge Wong's voice was final. You documented your own crimes, your surveillance files, your conspiracy recordings, your financial manipulations. You handed me everything I needed to destroy your case. As we left the courthouse, Brandon tried one last desperate move. He grabbed my arm in the parking lot, his eyes wild with panic. Elena, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The charming man I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Brandon, I said quietly, you whispered that I'd need my tears when you took the house. Crystal giggled about taking the car. Your mother smiled about taking my pride. I pulled my arm free. But karma had other plans. 6 months later, I was sitting in my newly renovated kitchen, the one I'd always dreamed of, reading the newspaper over morning coffee. The headline made me smile. Local real estate agent sentenced to 2 years for fraud. Brandon had lost everything. His business license was revoked, his assets seized to pay back what he'd stolen. Crystal had been deported after her visa violations came to light during the investigation. Margaret was living in a small apartment across town, her reputation in ruins after the local newspaper picked up the story. My design business was thriving. Word had spread about the woman who'd outsmarted her cheating husband and his criminal mistress. Clients respected someone who could handle adversity with intelligence and grace. Carlos knocked on my door that morning, holding a bottle of champagne. Thought we should celebrate, he said. Brandon's appeal was denied. I poured 2 glasses and we sat on my back porch, looking out at the garden. I was finally free to design however I wanted. Any regrets? Carlos asked. I thought about it for a moment. Just one, I said. I regret not seeing through them sooner. But then you wouldn't have had such a perfect revenge. I laughed, the sound echoing across my beautiful yard. It wasn't revenge, Carlos. It was justice. There's a difference. He raised his glass. To justice, then. To karma, I corrected, clinking my glass against his. And to never underestimating a woman who's been pushed too far. The sun was shining, my coffee was perfect, and for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. In my house, living my life, free from people who never deserved me in the first place. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well.